Good evening, good morning. My name is Frank Januzzi. I'm president of the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation. And while we wait for the room to populate, please enjoy this brief musical interlude. Again, good evening, good morning. My name is Frank Januzzi, and I have the honor to serve as the president and CEO of the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation. And it's my great pleasure to bring to you all this evening or this morning, wherever you may be, this webinar exploring U.S. Japan cooperation in space. For those of us of a certain age, the music of Richard Strauss, as brought to us by the Berlin Philharmonic, immediately conjures Stanley Kubrick's 1968 masterpiece, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Released just 1 year before Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece of science fiction envisioned a world in which the humankind had pushed beyond the Earth's boundaries to the moon and beyond. And while it's taken us a little longer than Arthur C. Clarke imagined to establish a base on the moon, this groundbreaking work of science fiction nonetheless has foretold the push of humans beyond our planet and to the stars. And from the beginning of that enterprise, the U.S. and Japan have worked together. I will say a couple of words about the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation. Created 43 years ago, our mission is quite simple. Much easier, I think, than interplanetary travel. Our goal is to promote mutual understanding and cooperation through dialogue. And we do that through both public programs such as this evening's, but also through convening working groups to study public policy challenges that really matter, and by investing in networks of people who are problem solvers. And we do this between the United States and our key partners in Asia. And as I was saying, no partner has been more fundamental to the United States in East Asia than Japan. Partners in the Apollo missions, partners in the International Space Station and the Space Shuttle, and partners today in taking America back to the moon. A lot has changed since Neil Armstrong first set foot on the moon. Space has become much more competitive, congested, and contested. There are more actors in space than ever before. And we rely upon space in ways that we could not have imagined. Everything from our GPS positioning systems that prevent us from getting lost in a national park to moving our money from one bank account to our children's bank account, if you're me. Space is critical to every aspect of our existence on this planet, from weather prediction to communications to reaching out and looking at the stars and better understanding our solar system and our universe. So tonight we're going to delve a little bit into the U.S. cooperation with Japan in space, where we were, where we are, and where we're headed. To do that, we've got 4 fantastic experts, the first of whom is Dr. Soichi Noguchi. He is in that elite company of humans who have left the planet, and in his case, 3 times, and successfully returned to the planet 3 times by 3 different methods: Space Shuttle, Soyuz, and ISS coming back. I'll have to ask him whether it was a Dragon capsule or an earlier one. Noguchi-san was born in 1965, 1 year after I was, and he was selected to be an astronaut in 1996. He was the first astronaut in the world, as I mentioned, to accomplish the 3 methods of re-entry to the Earth. He also received, I learned today, a YouTube Creator Award for a live performance of Chopin in space, so I'm glad we had some music tonight. He received Special Distinguished Award from the Boy Scouts of Japan, something we also share, our lifelong commitment to scouting. which speaks, I think, to his spirit of adventure, his courage, but also his principles and his integrity. Noguchi-san, it is such an honor to have you here tonight. I'm going to turn the floor over to you for your presentation on U.S.-Japan cooperation in space. I will remind our audience that at any time you may put a question into the Q&A box you will find at the bottom of your screen. At the end of the evening, towards the end of the evening, we will take as many questions as we have time for from the audience. And now, Noguchi-san, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank, for a very warm introduction. Hey, what a way to kick off the webinar. I like the music, and yeah, I gotta watch the movie after the webinar is over. Good evening, America, and good morning, Tokyo. It is a great honor to speak with you today. I understand many of you in this room are aerospace engineers, researchers, or public officials shaping the technological and the political landscape of next generation. I spent 25 years working inside NASA and JAXA and flew to space 3 times, just like, Frank mentioned. Through those experiences, I have had a unique vantage point, seeing the planet from orbit, while also witnessing how international cooperation make human spaceflight possible. Today, I would like to talk about U.S.-Japan cooperation in human spaceflight and how this partnership is shaping the strategic future of exploration. This is not a story about rockets and astronauts. It is also about alliances, technology leadership, economic resilience, and shared democratic values in space. Over the next 20 minutes, I will discuss why human spaceflight matters today, how the International Space Station built the foundation for the cooperation, how the IISE program is taking us back to the moon, the growing role of commercial space companies, and finally, why U.S.-Japan cooperation will be essential in coming decades. Next slide, please. All right, so that's the, okay, thank you, that's good. Human space flight is entered a new phase. For decades, space exploration was dominated by national programs led by governments. Today, however, we are witnessing a transformation. Alliances among democratic nations and partnership with commercial companies are becoming central drivers for exploration. The United States and Japan represent one of the most stable and productive partnerships in space. Together, we have built systems, standards, and operational experience that extends far beyond any single mission. Why does human space matter so much today? Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, it drives technological leadership. Advances in robotics, material science, life support systems, and communications all emerge from the challenge of operating in space. Second, it strengthens economic security. Space infrastructure supports global communication, navigation, weather forecasting, and disaster response. Third, it contributes to international stability. When nations cooperate in space exploration, they build trust and share rules for responsible behavior beyond Earth. In coming decades, these factors will become even more important as humanity expands its presence beyond low Earth orbit, meaning moon and beyond. Next slide, please. Yeah, International Space Station, my home away from home. And Frank, I see on your background the International Space Station. That's good. Hey, International Space Station represents the foundation of U.S.-Japan cooperation in human spaceflight. Since the year 2000, IISE has hosted a continuous human presence in space. It is one of the most complex engineering projects ever undertaken and perhaps the most successful example of long-term international cooperation. Japan's Kibo laboratory is largest module on the space station. It enables cutting-edge microgravity research ranging from life science to material engineering. For example, my last day on the space station, our team performed IPS, induced pluripotent stem cells experiment, and the DNA sequencing test. So those are the cutting-edge experiment. For my experience living and working on aboard ISS, I can say that the station is not just a laboratory. It is a testbed for international teamwork. Engineers from many nations collaborate daily to operate and maintain the space station. We, as astronauts, train together across cultures and languages. The ISS also enabled the emergence of commercial spaceflight, cargo resupply missions, and now the crew transportation, now done by the private companies, and they could play a major role in human space operation in the coming decades. As we look toward the future, ISS partnership have created the operational trust and the technical standards that will support the next phase of exploration. Next slide, please. Artemis Accord, namely, this is the next step in human exploration. Many of you know that Artemis is a US-led international initiative designed to return humans to the moon and establish a sustainable presence there. Unlike the Apollo missions of the 60s and 70s, Artemis is intended to build long-term and sustainable infrastructures on lunar surface. Japan is also playing an important role in the architecture. We will contribute advanced life support system and logistic capabilities. Japanese astronauts are also expected to participate in the future lunar missions. The upcoming Artemis 2 missions, hopefully early next month, planned as a first crewed lunar flyby, means go to the backside of the moon and come back. That will mark the first time that astronauts travel beyond low Earth orbit since Apollo era. And I have to say that my good friends, my buddy, Victor Glover, is the pilot of this Artemis 2 mission. What makes Artemis different is its collaborative structure. Multiple nations, commercial partners, and research institutions are contributing technologies and expertise. Next slide, please. Well, large programs inevitably evolve, and Artemis is not the exception. So many of you have heard about the recent changes. Last month, NASA conducted a major review of the program to improve the mission reliability. One of the key adjustments involves additional testing and on-orbit docking between two spacecrafts. The rendezvous and docking demonstration will help ensure that the crew vehicle and the landers, also support system, work seamlessly together before committing astronauts to lunar surface missions. Well, as a result, the timeline for the first lunar landing may shift slightly to the right. However, from an engineering perspective, these adjustments are prudent. Human spaceflight demands the highest possible level of safety and reliability. For engineers in particular, this phase is extremely important. It allows teams to validate interfaces, refine operational procedures, and reduce risks before critical missions. Next slide, please. Now it comes to the fun part, the commercial innovation. Another major change in human spaceflight these decades are the rapid rise of commercial space companies. NASA now relies on commercial providers for key components on Artemis architecture, including lunar landing systems. SpaceX Starship is being developed by does one such human landing system called HLS. Its design emphasizes full reusability and large payload capacity. Meanwhile, Blue Origin and its partners are also developing the Blue Moon lander as an alternative architecture. This diversification of providers creates resilience and competition, which ultimately benefits the exploration program. From an engineering standpoint, commercial innovation is accelerating the pace of development. Rapid testing cycles and iterative design approaches are allowing companies to advance capabilities much faster than the traditional aerospace programs. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about Japan. Japan is also strengthening its independent launch capabilities. We have H3 rockets. This represents Japan's new flagship launch vehicle, designed to provide reliable and cost-effective access to space. Developed by JAXA and the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, H3 aims to improve launch efficiency while supporting a wide range of missions. Japan also operates Epsilon rockets, a smaller solid fuel launch vehicle designed for responsive launches and scientific missions. In addition, private companies are entering the launch market. For example, Space One is developing the Kairos small satellite launch vehicle. These developers are important not only for national capability, but also for international collaboration. Reliable launch system ensure that Japan can contribute critical components and mission to global exploration programs. The sad things are that all three rockets are now grounded as we speak due to various technical reasons. Last week, however, JAXA successfully completed the CFT, that's a captive firing test, for the latest H330 configuration, meaning that there's no solid rocket booster, only the liquid engines go up to space. So CFT was a major milestone, so it is a huge boost for the return to flight of H3 rocket. Next slide, please. Let's talk about China. We must recognize that the geopolitical environment in space is also rapidly changing. China, already a huge power in space, they announced the plans to land astronauts on the moon before the end of this decade. The country is developing new launch vehicle and the cruise spacecraft designed for lunar missions. Actually, in February, they successfully completed in-flight abort test for their new generation space capsule called Mansfield. Mansfield is a dream vessel in Chinese. And the in-flight test abort is a huge step. I experienced that process back in 2019 during the SpaceX training for the Crew Dragon. And it is a huge step in their development testing. China's rapid progress demonstrates the strategic importance of space exploration. Achievement in lunar exploration carry not only scientific significance, but also technological and geopolitical influence. For United States, Japan, and other partners, this underscores the importance of maintaining strong alliances and cooperative frameworks. Competition in space is inevitable, but cooperation among trusted companies ensure that exploration remains open, peaceful, and governed by shared principles. Next slide, please. Japanese astronauts, they are also expected to play a historic role in Artemis program. Through the agreements between NASA and JAXA, Japan contribute technology and infrastructure, to the Gateway and the lunar missions. One particularly exciting development is that pressurized lunar rover, sometimes called the lunar cruiser, developed by Toyota in cooperation with Jackson. This vehicle will allow astronauts to travel much faster or much greater distance across the lunar surface while remaining inside a protected environment. And there is also a strong possibility that the Japanese astronaut will participate in the future lunar landing mission. If that happens, it will represent a powerful symbol of depth and trust within U.S. Japan alliance. Next slide, please. For strategic perspective, space infrastructures now underpins many aspects of modern society. Satellite systems enable global communications, navigation, financial networks, and environmental monitoring. As a result, space capabilities are increasingly tied to economic security and national resilience. Human exploration contributes to this ecosystem in several ways. First, it drives innovation across industries. Technologies developed for the space missions will often lead to the breakthroughs in robotics, medicine, and energy systems. Second, exploration strengthening supply chains and industrial capacity. Developing spacecraft, habitats, and life support systems requires collaboration across many sectors. Third, it reinforces alliances. Joint exploration missions require interoperability, data sharing, and coordinate policies among partner nations. Next slide, please. Well, to wrap up, let me conclude with the broader reflections. Well, over the past 2 decades, ISS demonstrated the nations can work together continuously in space. Now the Artemis program will extend the cooperation beyond low Earth orbit. For U.S. and Japan, this partnership represents more than a technical cooperation. It reflects shared values, openness, peaceful exploration, and the belief that space should benefit all of humanity. I would like to close my speech with the African proverb that I heard during my space station training. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. The journey back to Moon and eventually to Mars will be long. But by working together, we can ensure that the humanity future in space is both sustainable and inspiring. Thank you very much for your attention.
Domo arigatou gozaimasu, Noguchi-san. Thank you so much for those inspiring and concise and yet thorough remarks about the U.S.-Japan cooperation in space. As you mentioned, our two leaders, Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi and President Donald Trump, celebrated the centrality of cooperation in space as a vital component of the U.S.-Japan partnership just last week here in Washington, D.C. And I would also be remiss if I did not, on behalf of everyone here in Washington, say thank you for the 250 new cherry blossom trees who have been planted all along the tidal basin across Washington, D.C., and which are in full bloom as I speak here today. And the city has never looked more beautiful. But those trees and the warm, trusting relationship between our leaders reflects, I think, President Trump's ambition to realize a golden age in U.S.-Japan cooperation. But before turning to that strategic level theme, I just want to ask you sort of a personal question. As someone who has been in space, you share a fraternity and sorority status with a very select group of humans. And I'm just wondering how you personally may have been changed by the experience of seeing the Earth from outside our atmosphere and seeing what a fragile blue marble it is. Has that changed your outlook on life?
Well, thank you, Frank. Yeah, my first impression when I look out from the spatial window is it's not only the beauty, but as you speak, yeah, the fragility of our planet. I saw very, very thin atmosphere covering the Earth. So it's a very delicate layer protecting everything we know. It immediately made me realize that how limited and how interconnected our world is.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I was struck by the absence of borders. From orbit, you do not see countries, so you see one Earth, one team. And this perspective changes how you think about cooperation. Many of the change we face was such as climate change, disaster response, yeah, even communication infrastructure. Those are truly global in nature. It reinforced the importance of space system actually as a critical infrastructure. Personally, it changed how I see responsibility. We are not just operating in space. We are responsible for preserving both the space environment and Earth below. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for that. And I hope that everyone watching, but also that eventually everyone on the planet can share that sensibility that you have shared. One nation, one planet, ultimately, and a fragile environment that we must protect even as we push beyond it to the moon, to Mars, and beyond. You mentioned in your talk how competition can be very productive. And I think one of the geniuses of Japan is the competitiveness of its private sector system and democratic values. And this is something the US and Japan share. Can you talk to me a little bit about the competitive juices that drive Japanese and American companies and the Japanese and American nations to simultaneously compete with each other, as well as to cooperate to go far together? And I'm curious, was there ever a little underlying competition that you saw in space among the astronauts, even as you worked together as one team?
Well, we definitely work as one team, but of course, competition always is a huge boost for us. But I would like to mention that back in 2010-ish, when we closed to the end of the space shuttle era, there was some competitives in the cargo spaceship. Japan has HTV, and the Russia has its own cargo ship. And also, that was the time that the U.S. private company is starting to take shape. It's hard to realize that now the SpaceX is dominating the world, but at that time they are just starting to send some piece to the low Earth orbit, and that was a direct competition. And actually, they inherited the first docking system from HTV. So that was a cooperation in the midst of a competition. And of course, now the story we know that SpaceX is now dominating. But at the early phase, those newcomers are helping each other to achieve a greater goal, that sustainable human presence on low Earth orbit, and that pays off. So hopefully the next phase is also the same: collaboration and competition, both good for our future.
I thank you for that answer. I wanted to ask one final question before turning to our panel of experts. I hold a cell phone here. I don't know if it's visible. There we go. A cell phone that has more computing power than the space shuttle had when it launched from Earth. And I'm just curious, as you look at the milestones that you yourself have observed in the progress of human spaceflight since you first launched, um, what does that tell you? What do those milestones tell you about the pace of change and where we may be headed? Can you put on your science fiction lens a little bit for us and imagine how those milestones of the past illuminate the path to the future?
Well, Frank, you are so correct that the cell phone that you're holding has much computing power compared to space shuttle, nonetheless the Apollo program. So the I talked about the rapid change in space industry, but the pace is even faster in IT. These days, AI is definitely changing the shape of the industry and the whole 9 yards. So my expectation is that the AI will eventually come to space exploration. Right now, we don't have much AI power used on the space station. There is some experiment working on with the AI, but very limited. So hopefully those the new changes in IT and AI will help us in the coming age on lunar surface, and hopefully when we go to Mars, that should be a much more autonomous and automatic and less human, but many robotics and AIs to make to use the Mars environment. So that's the rapid changes as we speak today.
Well, we just have to make sure that Hal is on our side. If the AI is in space, let's make sure that Hal serves us rather than us serving Hal. For those who haven't seen 2001: A Space Odyssey, go see it. Uh, Now, I do want to bring in our expert panel, and we are so fortunate to be joined this evening by three extraordinary individuals. I will introduce them briefly, and I won't do justice to their resumes. We are joined this evening by Dr. Setsuko Aoki, professor at the Chiba Institute of Technology and professor emerita at Keio University. She is also a board director of Sky JSAT Holdings since 2023. I first met Dr. Aoki as we launched the U.S. Japan Space Forum here at the Mansfield Foundation 11 years ago. I was drawn to her because she was serving at the time as a member of the Committee on National Space Policy, advising the Prime Minister of Japan on space policy. She's an expert on space law, and we're very fortunate to have her. We're also joined this evening by the other co-chair of the U.S. Japan Space Forum here at the Mansfield Foundation, Dr. Sadia Pekkanen. Dr. Pekkanen is an internationally renowned expert on national security strategy and space policy, especially as it relates to U.S. partnerships with Japan. She is the Job and Gertrude Tamaki Endowed Chair at the University of Washington in Seattle and has written extensively on space policy, space data. She also runs something called SPARC, which I think is fabulous. It's the Space Policy and Research Center at the University of Washington in the Department of Aeronautics and Astronautics. Dr. Pekkanen, we're honored to have you. And last but not least, we have Mr. John Hill. I don't want to promote you, but I do, John. John retired from the United States Department of Defense, where he held the position of Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space and Missile Defense Policy, having also served periodically during his tenure as the Acting Assistant Secretary for Space Policy at the Pentagon. But more important for me and for the Mansfield Foundation, John is a product of the Mansfield Fellowship Program, supported by the Department of State for the last 30 years, sustained because of the importance of the U.S.-Japan relationship and the importance of training Americans to speak Japanese, understand Japanese culture, and serve as the connective tissue to help unite our two nations across many fields of endeavor. And John was a member, I hate to say it, John, but 30 years ago, from the very first class of Mansfield Fellows who ever deployed to Japan. And that reminds me that I failed to say anything about Mike and Maureen Mansfield, and I will just briefly say that Ambassador Mansfield ably represented the United States in Tokyo for 11 years, nominated by President Carter and President Reagan, and his lifetime partner of 70 years, Maureen, is the person to whom he attributed all of the success of his life in public service as a U.S. Senator and as ambassador. And his most famous expression, which is appropriate for this evening, was to remind us that the U.S. and Japan relationship is the most important bilateral relationship in the world, bar none. I want to turn first to you, Sadia. Noguchi-san made reference to the fact that space has democratized. It is no longer the domain only of nation states, but also of private sector companies, but even individuals capable of launching space flight. How is this changing things in space? And especially even in the context of partnerships between Japan and the United States in space, how has the democratization and privatization of space travel and exploitation of space changed the domain?
So thank you so much, Frank. I hope you can all hear me. First of all, thank you to both Frank and Setsuko. It's just always an honor to co-chair this forum with you. And I wanted to also say how inspiring it is to be in the room with Dr. Noguchi, who's really the long trajectory of the arc of his career really represents the transition or the synergies between government and commerce. And that is really what I want to talk about today. He was on the shuttle, as you know, during the government era, along with the Soyuz. And then he was, Frank, you were asking, he was also on the SpaceX's Crew Dragon, the first operational mission. So his personal biography is literally the history of the human spaceflight partnership across the U.S. Japan, compressed in one career, is extraordinarily impressive. That makes him, of course, a very unusually authoritative person in terms of what you just heard, but it also makes him a very inspirational one for the purposes of this forum, where we are, of course, focused on collaboration, not just at the government level, but across the commercial level as well. So Frank, you asked me a question about the democratization of space. And I think the easiest way to explain this is to say that to understand the democratization of space, you have to understand one number. And that is a number that was brought single-handedly about by SpaceX. And according to NASA, own research, the space shuttle cost over $54,000 per kilogram to reach orbit. Falcon 9 brought that cost down to just under $3,000. That is a huge reduction. And Starship, the next generation that Dr. Noguchi also mentioned, is targeting $10 per kilogram. That trajectory, not any single rocket, is what really opened space up to everyone in this room and beyond. So what does this have to do with democratization? What I would say is that that huge reduction and that downward trajectory in launch costs doesn't just change the space economics, it really changes who gets to play. And that brings me to democratization, right? By which we mean the expansion of the space economy, as well as the expansion of space opportunities to many new players around the world: government, civilian, commercial, military. CubeSats, software-defined payloads, commercial imagery, pharmaceuticals and biotech R&D, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities that once required gigantic budgets are now within the reach of startups, within the reach of universities, within the reach of researchers, intelligence analysts, business professionals, even foreign governments. And these are all enabled because the cost of getting them to space is getting lower by the day. Hundreds of companies now operate across the full stack. I'm talking propulsion, sensors, ground software, data analytics, scientific experiments in both the United States and Japan. Most, of course, did not exist 14, 15 years ago. So I think Setsuko and Frank, you will recall that when we started the forum, we didn't have the same ecosystem as we do today. And so we've seen, even in the evolution of the U.S. Japan Space Forum since 2014 and over a decade, that a forum also has to include many new players and many new voices. So I would say SpaceX is the symbol, but the democratization story of the global ecosystem is the real story. And it's not about one company. It's really about the economics nested in the geopolitical realities that Dr. Noguchi was talking about. And I think that John will also be talking about subsequently. So in the context of the U.S.-Japan space relationship, which we've all been tracking for a long time, this means a wide range of companies are also now building blocks for diplomatic pathways and collaboration going forward. And I think that the U.S. Japan Space Forum can help think about the collaborations as we move forward. So on the U.S. side, of course, you have SpaceX, you have Blue Origin, but also companies you may not have heard of, like Starfish Space, which are out in Seattle. And we can talk about that later. On the Japan side, of course, we have iSpace and Astroscale and Synspective and Axel Space. All of these companies have helped us really understand the changing ground on which we can build the basis for collaboration between the US and Japan. And I think what is particularly important is that exactly as you were saying, Frank, we are talking about, one of the world's most stable military alliances. And all the cooperation and collaboration that we have seen on the civilian, commercial, and military side increasingly has come under the auspices of this broader alliance. And so I think that will continue to frame things as we move forward. And I think that the U.S. Japan Space Forum will continue to monitor and play a role alongside in keeping that track 1.5 open as a pathway for collaboration and building and thinking about collaborations. So thank you.
Thank you.
Stop there.
Thank you so much, Sadia. And you referenced the U.S. Japan Space Forum hosted by the Mansfield Foundation. I want to take this opportunity to thank the many companies that make that forum possible, including Mitsubishi Electric Corporation, IHI, L3 Harris, Boeing Raytheon, MHI, Honeywell, NEC, Astroscale, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Amazon Web Services, and others. And it speaks to your point. The space domain is now populated by dozens of large and hundreds of smaller companies, all of whom are contributing to humankind's exploration and utilization of space. I want to bring John Hill into the conversation, and we'll all be able to talk together. John, you inhabit a realm that is mostly about national security space. That has been your career path. And you have explained to me that space used to be more about rockets and satellites for Earth observation, but that now space is becoming a data-driven domain. Could you please help us better understand, John, how data is driving both the use of space and the value of space to all of humankind, and what that means as we shift to a data-driven space domain?
Well, thank you, Frank. And first, let me say it's really humbling to be part of this panel with Noguchi-san and Sadia-san and Siska-san. And good to see people again too. It's been a while. The point that I make in focusing on space from the perspective of national security and defense is it's not that space was ever a domain of rockets. Rockets are cool. I mean, Robert Goddard showed us that, and Wernher von Braun and others. But rockets are a means to get your capability into space. And it's really what is the capability you are putting up there. And for the militaries and intelligence communities, it started, of course, with observation and satellite communications. That was in an era when the cost was not the cost that Sadia just described, and governments were the only ones who could do it. And you ended up with very large satellites, capabilities bundled together and so forth. What I boil it down to, though, thinking about it in modern terms, militaries still do what militaries have always done. They shoot, they maneuver, and they communicate. And they do those things first and foremost to prevent conflict. The first job is to deter people from trying to resort to military conflict to achieve their objectives. And their objectives are usually, they're not about space. Their objectives are about things on Earth. They want to control things. They want to have power over people, over economic resources, over territory. So the role of a military is to prevent conflict, and it does that by denying an aggressor the ability to achieve objectives, or it does it by credibly suggesting to a potential aggressor that there is a cost to be paid that is bigger than the cost that the aggressor wants to pay. Those are basic fundamentals. The thing that space does, though, is it helps the military do all of its basic fundamentals in totally different ways than it could ever do them before. Space enables militaries to shoot, maneuver, and communicate faster, with greater accuracy and precision at longer distances. You can command and control forces all around the world simultaneously. And the reason is because the systems in space are doing, I basically boil it down to 5 different things, and they're all around data. They generate data, and imagery satellites are a good example of that. They transport data, communications satellites, good example of that. They process data too, and that happens on board communication satellites and other satellites. Of course, they store data because you can't always download it. And fundamentally, what's really most important when you're thinking about cooperation, space systems protect data. Because you have that data is critical to the mission you're trying to accomplish. If it's an intelligence mission or a military mission, scientific missions as well, for that matter. So what you used to have, though, in the older model of a few large systems has so rapidly transformed in the last decade to the ability to proliferate small numbers of systems. And that has really changed and continues to change the space security equation. In the past, satellites themselves would be a highly prized target. There are still some satellites that would be highly prized targets if a conflict extended to space. But nowadays, companies launch satellites knowing that some of them won't work, and that's just a cost of business. We'll deorbit it and we'll put up another one. Taking out individual satellites is not something that is going to benefit an aggressor. Mm-hmm. Jamming is much harder too. Electronic warfare in space has been complicated by this, and that's always a game of somebody develops an electronic warfare technique on the offensive side, and somebody develops a defensive counter. And certainly proliferated networks have created great challenges for those who would want to engage in electronic warfare. So it's really now it's the network. And that network in space is connected to the networks on Earth. It's the data, we're moving it to wherever we need it. And so the thing that, when you're coming back to the cooperation potential, and that's really what we're about in this webinar, is the ability to work with other countries, companies to work with each other internationally, and countries to work with each other, and to be able to put the necessary systems in place so that you can have confidence that the systems that you're integrating with each other are all going to be secure, they're going to operate better, and your network is going to be stronger. The data will be accomplishing what you need to accomplish with it.
Thank
We've
you.
had a lot. Pardon?
Oh, thank you, John. Let me interrupt to say that I appreciate what you're getting at, which is that the resilient use of space is a deterrent against many threats, and that to make space resilient and sustainable, the U.S. Japan partnership has a similar degree of interoperability and cooperation in space that we've also developed on land. I want to get Setsuko into the conversation as well because, John, your presentation speaks to me about the fact that in order to maintain the peaceful use of space for all of humankind, ultimately, you need both the capabilities that the U.S. and Japan are bringing to the table together, but you also need norms and codes of conduct. And unlike the oceans, where we have well understood treaties, and sorry, my light, there we go. And unlike sort of airspace, where airplanes navigate according to international agreement and treaties, space remains a domain largely free of established international law. But that doesn't mean that we don't have norms of behavior that are essentially essential to the sustainable use of space. Dr. Aoki, this is your field of expertise, space law. Could you speak to us a little bit about how Japan as a nation has evolved as in terms of its own space laws, but also about how the U.S. and Japan working together have tried to establish norms of behavior in space that would allow it to remain resilient and exploitable for our national security the way that John described?
Oh, thank you very much, Frank, for your question. And at first, I'm very, very honored to attend this, precious webinar. Yes, about, space legislation in Japan. Well, Japan is actually a latecomer in establishing national space norms, national space law. Well, of course, Japan has been cooperating with almost all, international forum, including especially United Nations Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. But mainly because of, I think it's because commercialization was not flourished in Japan. We didn't, actually didn't need national space law. But then seeing the commercialization and the privatization of space started in 1990s. Most of the world, Japan kind of thought we need strong, robust national laws. And since 2008, Japan has been establishing, national space laws and regulations in a very organized and sustained and elaborate way. So using it, Japan is, I think, contributing to fostering norms in outer space. Well, let me put two examples. Well, it's true, we cannot make treaties legally binding instrument anymore. Well, due in part to the consensus-based decision-making in the UN COPIOS. But, it doesn't mean we cannot address matters. Non-legally binding instruments, code of conduct, guidelines, and even technically based standards, as Frank said, are useful if the contents are detailed and reasonable and acceptable to main spacefaring nations. And if non-legally binding instruments are made and they are incorporated in national licensing systems, eventually they would become substantially legally binding. And states can act on the same level playing field and act as responsible partners. And United States was very successful in doing that in around the turn of the century about making space debris mitigation guidelines. But today, just mitigation is not enough, and we have to remove space debris, and refueling, repairing, and manufacturing in outer space is very important. And here, Japan enters. Now, one of the latest requirements for licensing in Japan is on-orbit servicing guidelines. A premature but rather effective space traffic management guidelines. And now, already the United States and Japan are informally, stakeholders, industry, academics, and sometimes government people are talking about this premature space traffic management things. Well, at first for both countries, we could be coordinated. We could coordinate it, and then it can disseminate to like-minded countries. So this is one thing we can do. And the next one is accumulating good state practices. We don't have any, mechanisms for instance, space resource exploration, exploitation, and extractions. And already NASA and iSpace, Japanese companies, Sadia introduced already, had a contract that iSpace took rigorous, and then it's transferred, the ownership is transferred to NASA. Well, it's constructive transfer, transfer of ownership, but it's the first beginning way. And already 2 licenses are given to iSpace by the Japanese government. So both countries can accumulate good practices. And finally, there is no denying that there is a very big capability difference between the United States and Japan. However, about norm creation and also yielding soft powers, Japan has been rather successful in the Indo-Pacific nations, and Japan is trusted. And Japan has integrity to the U.S. space policy and as well. So together, we can bring many good norms and behaviors to the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Setsuko. Now I want to bring Noguchi-san back into the conversation and just have a rapid fire round with responses of less than 1 minute each. And the first question I want to put to our 4 experts is, if there was one thing you could do to help unlock deeper U.S.-Japan cooperation in space, what would that be? And let me turn to you first, Noguchi-san. How can we do even more together in space?
Okay, 1 minute, real quick. Yeah, to unlock deeper cooperation between 2 countries. Yeah, we need to move from project-based collaboration to truly integrated strategic partnership. You can talk about alignment at the policy level, and you can talk about the public-private collaboration across 2 countries. But I think that interoperability is the key. Trust is built not only through agreements, but through shared operation, as we did in ISS, and probably we do on the lunar surface. Interoperability will help us strengthen and unlock deeper cooperation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Noguchi-san. Sadia, what can we do to deepen cooperation?
Yeah, so I want to follow from what Dr. Noguchi is saying and focus a little bit more on LEO. I think one of the most important problems really is active debris removal. And I think we need to be very concrete about the ways that we can actually do it. Commercially, we have 2 companies in the commercial space ecosystem in both the US and Japan, Astroscale in Japan and Starfish Space, which was just awarded a contract by the US Space Force for end-of-life satellite disposal, which means that we have a basis for thinking about it from a government procurement perspective. And this, I think, can build the potential for collaborating concretely, technologically, just as we've done across ISS, BMD, active debris removal. I think that is the way that I think we can concretely begin to build things and address what I think is an extraordinary challenge in low Earth orbit with all the debris that is going around.
Thank you, Sadia. And John, to you, is it policies or technologies? How can we deepen?
First of all, I want to say, I'm thinking back on Noguchi-san's presentation, if you want to go fast, stay in LEO. If you want to go far, get beyond GEO. And I think that's why we need to be thinking in all of these domains. In the security area, two things. First, there is the Combined Space Operations Initiative. The United States, Japan, several NATO countries, Australia, New Zealand participate in that. Related to combined space operations, and that's a really good coordination kind of policy coordination and sharing ideas. There's also Operation Olympic Defender. That is a Space Command operation, but is a multinational operation now. We've taken, and it has within it variety of mission areas. Japan being I would want to see Japan become part of Operation Olympic Defender, focusing in particular initially on space domain awareness. That is something where everybody can contribute. You have to share the data. It benefits the militaries, it benefits the civil and scientific space. So those would be two areas on the policy side.
Thank you, John. I remember how struck I was by another space science fiction movie, Gravity, by the threat posed by debris in space to the resilience of
It's
space.
Hollywood.
It's very Hollywood, and it scared me, perhaps too much, but it did point out a real problem of space debris and end-of-life planning for satellites. Setsuko, is there a norm or a law or other changes you'd like to see to help unlock deeper cooperation?
Setsuko, you're muted.
Yes, I forgot. I'm sorry. Well, it's already progressing, but I think more close collaboration between industries and governments are needed for making the Artemis Accords really successful. Now that, well, some European countries are not so enthusiastic about, well, Artemis Accords, well, operations. So, well, some very conscious and planned government and industries collaboration to make this accord successful would be needed, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Setsuko. I want to turn to some questions from the audience. And we've spoken about how space is strategic. And Noguchi-san put on the table the fact that China and the United States and Japan are in many ways regarded as competitors in space, a race back to the moon. And we have a question from the audience, is China a space power that represents a threat to the U.S. Japan sort of alliance in space? How should we view China's activities in space? Let me turn to you, John. This was part of your job responsibility, I think, at some level, to ensure the resilient use of space against any threat.
So going back to the 3 C's that you quoted at the beginning, the competitive, congested, and contested, I'm all for competition. I think competition is great. And I think China has every right to be competing in space for their own reasons. The congested part of it, when that first 3 C's came out in 2010, big part of the congestion was the inability of humanity to keep track of what's out there in space. As we get better and better at that, we're actually able to realize that space really is pretty big. Although if you're on the space station and something's coming at you, that's not a good feeling. I'm sure Noguchi-san can tell us about that. With respect to the contested part, that's the concern you have with China, as you would have with Russia or anyone. And I think it's just a reality that in every domain of human endeavor, and space is a domain of human endeavor, countries contest things with each other. And so you go back to the basics I was talking about of reducing the incentives that countries have to take those kinds of actions.
Thank you, John. I have a question from the audience from, I think maybe someone who describes themselves as a young American who finds himself or herself excited and proud that the U.S. and Japan have such a wonderful track record of working closely together in space. And this questioner asks, how do people in Japan feel about Japan as a spacefaring nation in partnership with the United States? Is there pride? I don't know, reluctance? What kind of feelings do Japanese people have that are drawn out by the cooperation with the United States in space? Setsuko, Noguchi-san, let me turn to you first, Setsuko.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, well, Japanese people are, well, I believe, very enthusiastic about the stronger cooperation with the United States. The United States is the only ally for us. And please remember that when, well, GPS, well, the President Clinton wanted to be GPS and world standard. It's only Japan who didn't have some, well, love affair with European or well, Chinese GNSS system. Thank you.
Yes, it's true. Japan adopted the QZSS system, which is completely interoperable with the
Yeah.
United States and helps our defense systems and our resilience in space, and is a tribute, I think, to the close interoperability and integration of U.S. and Japan in space. We have another questioner who asks a more practical question. How are we going to live in space? I suppose that this is something that, as we think about establishing a permanent presence on the moon, is very much on the minds of private sector as well as governments. Noguchi-san, you're our only member here who has actually been to space, but what do you think about dwellings and resilient presence of humans in space? How is that going to be accomplished?
Well, it's we already did that on the lower orbit, just like on the space station. The thing is that the moon is a little bit far, 3 days one way compared to maybe 2 hours on the space station. So it's a bit far. But the key is the interoperability and again international cooperation. One countries may not be enough, but as a teamwork, we can build. We can build trust, and we can build the basis on the lunar surface.
Well, this brings me to my final question for the whole panel. Without being too idealistic, I think that your time in space, Noguchi-san, demonstrated that you had Chinese, Russian, American, European, Japanese astronauts all working together in space on different space vehicles and on different space missions. And space has been traditionally both a competitive strategic domain, but also something that inspires us with a knowledge that we are one human species. And it has the power potentially to unite humankind in great endeavors that require the marshaling of all of our resources and innovation and creative thinking and scientific prowess. For all four of you, with the rapid fire response, how can we better realize a vision for space which would be cooperative and fixed on human objectives rather than on national objectives? And let me start with you, Sadia, and we'll move down the whole list.
So I think that this is a question that probably Dr. Noguchi can answer better with the focus on human beings in space, because we've already, of course, built on that, and we can build on the experience on the ISS with what we are going to do on any lunar surface and beyond that. But how do we effect that? I think we are beginning to effect that already through things like the Artemis Accords. And the next step is really to begin to build the technical architecture, which we have already also begun to do. And as you may have heard today, with the cancellation of Gateway, there is a pivot to a American-led base on the moon. And so I think the next step is going to be to sort of think about very carefully the architecture and the bilateral agreements by which that arrangement is going to be executed, especially if we're going to have, say, Japanese astronauts alongside American ones on the moon.
Thank you, Sadia. And to you, John?
Well, I think it's going to be in the civil realm. It's not the military realm, and the national security realm will continue to be what it is. And norms are very important to how you avoid miscalculations and conflict breaking out where there was no intention for it to break out. So that is still an important area on the national security side. But fundamentally, it'll be the civil side that that is where you work together to the greatest extent across humanity and achieve the other musical feat of 2001, which is the beautiful blue Danube in space.
Thank you, John. Setsuko?
Yes, using every channels, and if well, we just continue to act, and action would well make success success projects, and then negotiation and true international cooperation will start. So action is needed, I think.
That's a call to action, which I will echo. I think that the world needs this kind of discussion about peaceful exploitation of space together because it itself can galvanize new channels of communication. And I think, as John says, especially in the commercial and private sector. And perhaps the UN Space Treaty, we have one of our Mansfield fellows, Joshua Santini, chimes in, reminding us that the UN Space Treaty of 1967 which governs sort of nation states in space, maybe needs to be revised now that the private actors are so active in space, and especially since the private actors can also be a driver of international cooperation. Noguchi-san, the final word from our panel goes to you this evening. Please share with us your vision or inspiration for how nations might cooperate more, do more cooperatively in space.
All right, 1 minute, right?
Yes, thanks.
Well, I was fortunate enough to live 4 years in Moscow for the Soyuz training, and I'm probably the very lucky people who actually visited the Chinese training center about 10 years ago. So, and Yan Liwei, the leader of the Chinese cosmonaut, is a good friend of mine. We are in the same ages. So, well, compared to my 25 years in Houston, it's much, much shorter. But the answer is, does the space holds power to unite humanity? Yes, I believe the space still holds the unique power to unite humanity, but it requires deliberative effort. The question is not whether the cooperation is possible. It is how we design frameworks that makes cooperation sustainable. Just like Dr. Aoki mentioned, we need some great framework to make it possible. My view, space is not will not automatically unite us, but it can provide a platform where trust can be built. I like the proverbs that the Russian always say: trust but verify. Доверяй, but no проверяй. So we need trust, but we need to be verify that the trust is still there. Thank you.
Thank you, Noguchi-san. And I want to draw this evening to a close by building briefly on your final remarks. You talked about the necessary platform for international cooperation and that it won't build itself. And I think that our two leaders, Prime Minister Takaichi and President Trump, that their model, working together as partners in space, should be an inspiring platform which can be built out beyond the very special U.S. Japan bilateral relationship and could be a model for the kinds of cooperation that the entire world ought to aspire to when they think about how we go into the stars together, learning about the universe that we inhabit and exploring it, hopefully in a spirit of humankind seeking our destiny in the stars, not unlike that destiny that Arthur C. Clarke imagined when he thought now 60 years ago about a planet where humans would not be bound only to life of apes in the dirt on the earth, but would actually be traversing the heavens and the stars and the universe in a spirit of exploration and discovery. Thanks to all who have joined us this evening. My special thanks to Noguchi-san for your inspiring remarks, and to our panel of experts, John Hill, Setsuko Aoki, and Sadia Pekkanen. On behalf of the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Foundation, I want to thank everyone for joining this webinar in the wake of the summitry between our two nations, exploring U.S.-Japan cooperation in space. Domo arigatou gozaimashita. Thank you all, and have a good day or good evening, as the case may be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you all.
much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.